Today I wanted to spend just a few minutes to tell you about my favorite lens. I know we've talked about lenses for the last couple weeks, and I've talked about this 50mm lens before, but I really want to tell you about why I like this lens and why I think it's really worth it, and it's probably the only lens you will need for a while. So this 50mm lens, I use Canon, so my lens is Canon. There's an equivalent for Nikon if you're a Nikon user. My lens is the 50mm 1.8. Honestly, the reason I bought 1.8 as opposed to 1.4 is that I had read at the time that the 1.4 had some bokeh problems, and I can explain what bokeh is at a different time. Bokeh, I think is how it's pronounced. Anyway, but honestly, the 1.8 is very cheap. It was less than $100, which is relatively cheap for a lens, and it's a perfectly good lens. It's sharp, it takes great pictures, and it allows almost very low light for you to be able to still be able to take a relatively good shot. Yes, the 1.4 would have been a little bit better, and the 1.0 even better, but the prices actually start getting incredibly high once you start looking. So even though it goes from 1.8 to 1.4, the price might double or triple or even 4 times as much. And then the 1.0, I think, is like at least another 0 at the end of it, if not more. So the price difference is very large. And the nice thing about having this lens is that I find with kids and having my camera around me all the time, I have historically done really stupid things like drop my camera, and even if the camera falls from a very low height to the floor, it tends to be relatively sensitive, and I've broken this lens 3 different times. And if a lens is less than $100 and it breaks, it doesn't break your heart nearly as much as if a lens is $1,500 and it breaks. So while I was bummed each time, it was okay for me to be able to go out and buy another lens, because it was buy another copy of the same lens, because it was cheap enough, especially since I used to do this as a business, so I could write off my lenses. But nonetheless, the low price and the sharp quality and the good quality combined makes this a perfect lens. And I use this lens because the 50mm focal length is very, very, very good. It's like the equivalent of a 35mm cameras used to have. And it just allows you to take really good portrait shots, relatively good scenery shots, really good for street photography. Really, almost every situation you will find day to day, this lens is very, very good for it. There are a couple of cases where it's not so good, like we talked about in the last couple of weeks. So if I'm going to Yosemite, I tend to bring my wide angle with me because I know this lens won't do as good a job. If I'm going to take pictures, I did a shoot for a friend a couple of years ago of her husband who is a surfer. Yes, I brought my telephoto at that time. I didn't take it with the 50mm. But almost everything else I do with my 50mm. I take all my client shots with my 50mm. I take all my kids' daily shots with my 50mm. It's really just an incredibly versatile, easy, plain, simple lens, and it's very affordable. So I highly recommend it. It's better than the kit lens that comes with the kit if you buy these cameras with the kits. Yes, it doesn't zoom, and it doesn't have a range of focal length, but honestly, I promise you that if you train yourself to use this enough times, you will not regret it, and you will not miss the zoom. I never ever really miss the zoom. The only time I find myself actually missing it is if I'm trying to take pictures of things that are closer up than 50. If something is really right next to me, and most of the zooms don't actually accommodate that. You would have to have a relatively good wide angle for that. And honestly, most of the kit lens, if I remember correctly, comes with a aperture set of like 3.5 to 5, if not even worse. And this is at 1.8, and it's cheaper than the kit lens. And 1.8 means you can take pictures inside almost all the time. I take pictures in my house all the time, and they come out sharp and not blurry and really well lit. And that's really kudos to this lens more than anything else. Anyway, if this pitch hasn't convinced you, I would highly recommend you go buy a 50mm 1.8, 1.4 for your camera if you can afford it. It's really worth every penny. If you have questions, as always, feel free to leave me a message.